Shalom, 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 everybody. How y'all doing? Welcome back to Reading with Shilo. Man. And we here to start a new book in this next session of Reading with Shilo. We're here to start a new book, which I think is going to be a good one. Conflict Resolution Playbook. Practical communication skills for preventing, managing, and resolving conflict by Jeremy Pollack. Oh man, definitely think that's one that needs to be in the repertoire, in the holster. Conflict resolution playbook. Mhm. Practical strategies to manage conflict in both personal and professional relationships. As social creatures, conflict is an unavoidable aspect of the human experience. Unfortunately, effectively resolving our disputes is easier said than done. With the conflict resolution playbook, you'll discover real life solutions to the same old problems. Solutions that can help you make breakthroughs at work, improve your relationships at home, and lead to significant personal growth. You'll start by learning the underlying causes of conflict and the fundamental communication skills necessary for resolution. Then, you'll put that knowledge to use with clear cut strategies for preventing conflicts, resolving them once they start, and dealing with gaslighters, bullies, and other difficult situations. Along the way, you'll gain a better understanding of conflict itself, where it comes from, and why it cuts so deep, and how it can be of value. Back to the basics. Identify humankind's core psychological needs: identity, safety, care, anatomy, growth, and stimulation, and how they relate to conflict. Real world advice: learn to recognize different communication styles. Collaborate on solutions, practice assertiveness, and more through relatable scenarios and actionable strategies. Come on, get it together. The written word. Discover tips to avoid and manage conflicts that arise over email, text, or other forms of digital communication. What's up, Miss Jessica? How you doing? How you doing? Welcome in as we begin to dive into conflict resolution playbook to see what we can learn and grow from. Is there anything we can pull and use in our day-to-day lives? And we're going to try to read I'm going to try to read chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 being in part 1, the fundamentals of conflict resolution. Chapter 1 being conflict resolution 101, and chapter 2 being 10 essential communication skills for resolving conflict. We'll see what Mr. Pollack, what Mr. Jeremy Pollack has to say, and what kind of practical communication skills he advises that can be of use. Make sure I got all my stuff ready to go. All right. Conflict resolution playbook. To anyone who has experienced the pain of relationship conflict, may these tools help diminish the likelihood of such pain in the future. Ooh-wee. Bum, 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 bum. Introduction. All right. Jessie was not happy. She'd been working for me for only a few months when COVID-19 erupted and my company took a 90% hit in new business. In a scramble to stay afloat and to keep my contractors working, I shifted my team members' roles and hours, assigning each of them new projects to complete while their normal tasks were temporarily obsolete. Rendered temporarily obsolete. Oh Lord. All right. Bum, 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 bum. But it was obvious Jesse was aggravated and demotivated. I couldn't figure out why. As a conflict resolution specialist who teaches leaders and managers how to achieve and maintain employee satisfaction, this failure hit me particularly hard. Thinking I was close to losing a valuable employee, I called Jessie. She opened the floodgates, explaining how frustrated she felt as the result of the sudden role changes, which happened without much collaboration or input from the team. Instinctively, I felt defensive, not empathetic. Did she not understand I was doing my best? It took all my internal resources just to keep from hanging up. But I stayed on the phone. I didn't react emotionally. I heard what she was saying and how she interpreted my actions. I took responsibility for my lack of clear communication, reassuring her that I valued her work. Eventually, the dust settled, and I felt humbled once again by a fundamental yet challenging truth of conflict and peace psychology. Two people can have completely different understandings of the same event. Despite my experience in the field, I still find myself in conflicts from time to time. And why shouldn't I? Conflict is a natural part of social life. In fact, it's one of the key drivers of innovation, deeper relationships, and personal growth. Of course, that all depends on how we handle conflict. Certainly, conflict can become destructive, but short of that, the friction affords us a tremendous opportunity to create new and exciting solutions to the same old problems. This is true both at work and in our personal lives. Whether arguments with spouses and friends, heated debates with coworkers, or disagreements with difficult managers or employees, all types of conflicts can follow a creative or destructive path, and sometimes both. Often, when people engage in conflicts, they believe it is the other person's fault, as though one side could be solely responsible for the issue. They stew over it, clinging to any evidence that they are right and the other party is wrong, replaying the scenario in their head, holding on to the resentment and the sense of justice like badges of honor in their righteous fight. In truth, conflict almost always requires the participation of more than one party. Though entering conflicts is natural, effectively resolving those conflicts and the feelings they arouse is not. It takes effort, knowledge, and practice application of conflict resolution skills, which are not always easy to implement but are worth the effort. They are among the most important skills I have learned and continue to learn with regard to building and maintaining professional and personal relationships, harboring less resentment, and creating collaborative environments. When you know how to use them, it's like knowing how a magician does his tricks. They allow us to see past misunderstandings and misperceptions and direct conversations back to the here and now, where we can have common ground. Over the past decade, my mission has been to help individuals and groups in all walks of life find greater peace within themselves and among one another. The mission of this book is much the same, although it focuses exclusively on interpersonal conflict resolution in both and in both professional and personal relationships. Part one will cover the basic psychology of conflict and the fundamental communication skills necessary for conflict resolution. Part two will dive into strategies you can use to prevent conflicts, while part three covers strategies for resolving them once they've already begun. Finally, In part 4, you'll discover strategies for dealing with common conflicts like those involving gaslighters and bullies. These strategies may not feel natural at first, but with time and a bit of practice, they can lead to healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Part 1, the fundamentals of conflict resolutions. To build lasting peace in your life, it's important to first lay a strong foundation. In this opening section, I'll obtain a deeper appreciation. You'll obtain a deeper appreciation for the basic human needs that drive conflict when unfulfilled. You'll also discover a set of basic communication skills that are critical for conflict resolution. Together with these 2 chapters, will help you get the most out of the strategies in parts 2, 3, and 4. Chapter 1, Conflict Resolution 101. Conflict is tricky. It can show up in anticipated and mysterious ways, occur between enemies or lovers, and last for moments or decades. The field of conflict resolution is vast, addressing many themes with a variety of methods. To initially understand how to resolve conflict, it's important to gain a better understanding of conflict itself, including where it comes from, why it cuts so deep, and how it can be valuable. The basis of conflict. What disguises a peaceful relationship from a turbulent one? To answer that question, let's go down to the basics. The animal mind maps out the animal's environment so that it can create a productive model of the world and a repertoire of behaviors to respond to it. This bolsters its chances of survival and procreation. The more complex the environment is, the more complex the predictive model must become, and the wider the repertoire of behavioral responses must be. Humans accompany the most dynamic, complex environment of any animal, as far as we know. Understandably, building mental maps to include predictable models of our environments and generate potential responses to those environments is quite the computational task. We need to trust that our environment will not harm us, but instead will satisfy our sociological and psychological needs. But instead, excuse me, man, I'm messing up. We need to trust that our environment will not harm us, but instead will satisfy our sociological and psychological needs. Therefore, a peaceful relationship is one that satisfies our innate desire for trust. Think of it this way. When you trust someone deeply, you naturally like and appreciate them and want to be around them. When you do not trust someone, however, you likely feel threatened and want to avoid them and may be forced to defend yourself against them. Simply put, with trust comes peace, and with distrust comes avoidance and or conflict. In this context, trust implies our core needs are supported. Distrust implies our core needs are threatened. As such, like many scholars in the field of conflict resolution, I think of conflict within this framework. Conflict may be defined as the existence or perception of an impediment to one's core needs, values, or goals. Interpersonal conflicts interpersonal conflict specifically refers to when other humans are perceived to impede or threaten one's need or goals for being met. The 6 core psychological needs. If we accept that interpersonal conflict stems from a real or perceived threat to one's core needs, it is critical to answer the following question. What are our core needs? Obviously, We have sociological needs such as food and oxygen. What may not be so obvious, however, are our core sociological needs. Over the last century, scholars in various fields have presented theories about their needs. The overarching argument is that when needs are left unfulfilled, we are negatively impacted in numerous ways, such as suffering from heightened anxiety, stress, insecurity, interpersonal conflict, and even physical illness. When needs are satisfied, we should feel at peace, both with ourselves and others. Having synthesized many of these theories, I suggest that all humans possess six fundamental sociological needs: identity, safety, care, anatomy, growth, and stimulation. Six fundamental sociological needs: identity, safety, care, anatomy, growth, and stimulation. Depending on one's upbringing and personality, certain needs may be more pronounced, sensitive, or valued. Still, I would propose that every person requires the satisfaction and defense of all six. For more about how I came to this conclusion, visit my website, pollackpeacebuilding.com/needs. You will notice that many of these needs interact interdependently. That is, they can enhance or diminish one another when satisfied or impeded. As you read through the anecdotes in part 2, 3, and 4, try to identify which of the characters' needs are being affected in each situation. With some practice, you should find it easier to identify which needs are being affected in your own relationships. Identity. Identity. If humans build predictive models of the world around them, they must also create a sense of self that fits within these models. How should we act based on the environment of our own individual backgrounds? What do you mean to the world? In other words, what is our purpose? In response to these questions, we each form an identity, which helps us understand who we are, why we exist, and what we should do. We individuals have a shaky sense of identity. They may feel lost, confused, insecure, and or hopeless. For instance, these individuals tend to find and dive into causes head first without exercising healthy doubt, simply so that they can anchor their identities to a belief system. On the contrary, individuals who feel positive about themselves and their place in the world are typically more open to questioning their assumptions than individuals with an unclear sense of self. Confident people trust themselves enough to handle new information and changes to their external environment, including how they might fit into it. Safety. Physical safety is, of course, key to survival. But what about psychological safety? This type of safety consists of two components. Number one, the expectations of future physical safety. And number two, the sense that one is safe to be and express oneself authentically. First, future safety is not physical safety because it is merely a projection of the imagination. Therefore, it is a psychological need. In general, people must live in environments in which they feel confident that they will be able to survive at least somewhat comfortably and without persistent threat to themselves and their loved ones. People who live in war zones or unstable societies, for example, may feel persistent anxiety because the threat to their future well-being is constantly salient. Let's see what it is. Salient. 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 Let's see if I'm pronouncing it right. Salient. S-A-L. S-A-L. Salient. Salient. Adjective. Being most prominent. Number 2. A part of a defense line that projects into enemy territory. People who live in war zones or unstable societies, for example, may feel persistent anxiety because the threat to their future well-being is constantly being most prominent. Is constantly being most prominent. Salient. Second, individuals must feel it is safe to be themselves in whichever environment they exist. They must be able to safely accept and express their individual identities in ways appropriate to each environment and context. When people do not feel psychologically safe, they will likely feel anxious, insecure, and defensive. When they do feel safe, they will feel confident, hopeful, free, and at ease. Care. In his book, My Kindness is Good for You, Dr. David Hamilton explores how a lack of physical and psychological care actually leads to physical illness in children and infants. As we grow into adults, this need for care persists and manifests as as a desire for connection with other people, including for touch, feeling of belonging, and family. What happens to our body and mind during a conflict? When any living organism with the capacity for physical response senses a threat to its survival, its fight or flight. Its fight or flight response, also called the stress response, will be unconsciously activated. A suite of neurological signals and hormonal mechanisms activates the sympathetic nervous system, which in turn stimulates the organism's body in amazing ways. The adrenaline glands release the adrenal glands release adrenaline and noradrenaline into the bloodstream, which increases the heart rate, breathing, and blood pressure and provides energy and oxygen to the body so it can rapidly respond to danger by preparing to defend itself or flee. The brain can't always distinguish between an actual threat and a perceived threat. It responds to psychological threats, which are common in interpersonal conflict, in almost the same way it does to physical threats. As a result, we tend to lash out in defense and rage, escape by avoiding or shutting down, or submit by becoming passive and self-demeaning. During conflict, the emotional mind rages while the higher thinking mind essentially shuts off. This is why we often find ourselves outwardly and secretly furious when someone does or says the wrong thing, even if we don't fully understand why we've reacted that way. Most of the time, Other people are not actually threatening our lives, yet our minds and bodies respond in ways that would suggest they are. We can't prevent this response, but we can learn to effectively manage it. Breathing techniques, for example, are often used as effective methods of self regulation. Try repeating this useful mantra to disarm your nervous system. I am safe. No one is actually threatening me. Moreover, simply become aware of the stress response can simply becoming aware of the stress response can help you remember cognitive techniques for self-soothing during moments of interpersonal conflicts. You can find mindfulness response resources in the resources section on page 150. All right. The need for care may be directly linked to the need for safety, since living in groups has typically been the most important predictor of one's physical security. That's why people will typically look for family, whether that means investing in their biological family, seeking out other friends or like minded people, or finding romantic partners. People who feel cared for by others generally feel valuable, confident, and secure. Those who do not feel cared for or like they belong will often feel hopeless, lost, and insecure. Anatomy. The author of the U.S. Constitution recognized the need for anatomy or autonomy. Yeah, it's not anatomy, my bad. For autonomy as a fundamental right of all people, despite not necessarily having all people in mind at the time. I'm glad he said that. The idea of freedom is central in an individual's sense of identity and safety. Autonomy is the power to choose how, where, and with whom we live. This need often manifests as a desire for control, which every person experiences to some degree. Think of it this think of this in terms of the predictive models discussed earlier. If we have some control or choice over how, where, and with whom we live, we have a better chance of setting up a trustworthy environment. Take away people's sense of autonomy, and they will become extremely defensive, insecure, and frustrated, and either defiant or submissive. Take away people's sense of autonomy, and they will become extremely defensive, insecure, frustrated, and either defiant or submissive. People who feel autonomous, like they have power over their lives, will typically feel free, hopeful, optimistic, and secure. Growth. Essentially, growth is a person's need to progress in life, such as by setting goals and acknowledging their achievements. The psychological need for growth can manifest in different ways depending on cultural background and personality, and can range from professional or financial goals to social or familial ones. Some people, for example, believe only monetary success will satisfy them. Others have a need to learn and feel a sense of fulfillment when they acquire new insights and perspectives. No matter what goals each of us has, all humans seek psychological and personal growth, which in turn supports our needs for autonomy and identity. Those who do not feel they are progressing in any way tend to feel lost, worthless, and insecure. Those who acknowledge their own growth tend to feel hopeful, confident, and valuable. Stimulation. From infancy, the human mind seeks stimulation. In fact, the brain requires stimulation to properly develop. People find ways of stimulating themselves throughout their lives, whether through intrigue, challenge, entertainment, or interesting pursuits. When the mind is not concerned with securing safety and autonomy, it will search for things with which to busy itself. Some of these things are unproductive, but others will be supportive of the individual's needs and will generally lead to a sense of satisfaction. Understand conflict resolution. Understanding conflict resolution. Now that we understand conflict as stemming from real or perceived threats to one's needs, we can define interpersonal conflict resolution as any process through which people build trust that their needs will not be impeded or threatened by the other person. If we want to resolve conflict, we need to engender trust between people that they will not sabotage each other's needs and may, in certain relationships, actually help support or satisfy their needs. Number one, how to build trust between the individuals. Number two, how can we creatively satisfy the needs of everyone involved? The solution that ultimately satisfies everyone's needs may not be the solution anyone considered at the outset. The eventual solution may even lead us to abandon our initial positions on the matter. This is the creative element in a needs based approach to conflict resolution. If we understand the affected core needs of each individual, we can collaborate to find unique ways of satisfying them. Conflict management versus conflict resolution. Though the terms conflict resolution and conflict management are often used interchangeably, it can be helpful to distinguish between the two. Conflict resolution is a process in which the goal is to resolve the conflict, thereby reestablishing trust between parties so they can rebuild their relationship and put that particular conflict behind them. This is an ideal outcome, yet a process for resolution is not always possible or safe. Instead, conflict management may be more appropriate. Conflict management involves the establishment of processes and systems that are designed to minimize the negative effects of conflict and to support the safety and autonomy of the parties involved, despite the persistence of their conflict. Conflict resolution can happen between people who care about their relationship, either because the relationship is important unto itself or because it will help them achieve their goals. Conflict resolution is also applicable in cases where people do not care much for one another, do not need one another to achieve their individual goals, and have the ability to separate. Conflict management is more appropriate when people need each other to achieve their individual goals and or cannot easily separate. Examples may include co-parenting divorcees. Yeah, I already was thinking that. Examples may include co-parenting divorcees, co-workers who cannot stand each other but love their jobs, or neighbors who do not get along but refuse to move. In these cases, setting up a system to manage rather than resolve their conflicts might be a more reasonable solution, allowing individuals to coexist peacefully despite their differences. Just about every strategy chapter in this book can be applied to conflict resolution or to conflict management, depending on the particulars of the situation and the relationship. For specific focus on solving problems, see chapter 14 on page 94 and chapter 15, page 100. For focusing on managing difficult ongoing relationships, see chapter 4, page 30, and chapter 6, page 42. Believe it or not, we need conflict. We all are aware of the injurious outcomes of conflict. Often, however, we overlook opportunities and value of conflict. An optimistic outlook is absolutely essential for the successful conflict resolution process. Let's consider conflict in terms of basic physics, where conflict would be synonymous with opposing forces. When two or more distinct forces oppose one another, energy is released from the exchange. This energy or friction produced by opposing forces is responsible for the creation and destruction of all things, physical and non physical, in the known universe. On a human level, this friction is present among all people in all cultures across time and is primarily responsible for the creation and destruction of all human systems. Luckily, as sentient beings, humans have a choice when particulars do not. Humans have a choice when particles do not. That is, we can choose to be creative or destructive with the energy produced by conflict. Before, during, or after each conflict, we each have the opportunity to ask ourselves, do I want this conflict to create something or destroy something? I would contend that in any conflict, either route or both is wholly possible. On the one hand, allowing conflict to destroy is easy and fairly natural. Conflict regularly tears apart relationships, halts productivity and progress, and puts people on the defensive. On the other hand, conflict also regularly stimulates innovation, pushes people to pushes people and relationships to grow, prompts new systems of efficiency and operation, and leads to a variety of other progressive outcomes. Conflict has been the catalyst for almost all positive change in society because every failure or mistake is an opportunity for learning, innovation, and growth. At an interpersonal level, conflict can lead to numerous benefits, including the following. Health debates about the problem can lead to more informed solutions. An argument with a spouse or friend can surface underlying issues, resulting in greater mutual understanding of and care for each other. Conflict with a coworker or team can lead to positive changes in an organization, such as the establishment of new operating procedures, rules of conduct, and communication standards. Conflicts can generally help people clarify what does and does not work in their lives, helping them create a stronger sense of identity and confidence. Unlike the natural tendencies to fight or flight during conflict, getting creative with conflict so that it produces positive outcomes does not come so easily. Of course, that's exactly what this book is for. Which core need is driving your conflict? Are you experiencing conflict? It may be helpful to discover which core needs are being challenged. By understanding the needs at play, you can tailor solutions to satisfy them. Take the following quiz regarding a person with whom you are currently experiencing conflict. Rate each of the following statements from 1 to 5. Where number 1 equals strongly disagree, and number 5 equals strongly agree. Identity. Number 1. They respect me and consider my opinions. Let me get a piece of paper. Oh, my knee. Let me get another algebra right here. Let's see. Identity. Number one, they respect me and consider my opinions. Let me see. Number one equals strongly disagree, and number five equaling strongly agree. Number two, they do not interfere with activities I find meaningful or important. Number three, they support me for who I am and what I believe. Number four, they do not regularly challenge or doubt my beliefs. Safety. Number one, I feel comfortable being my authentic self around them. Number two, they do not interfere with pursuits that help secure my future. Number three, they do not threaten my safety or well being. Number four, they do not threaten my emotional and mental health. Care. Number one, they care about me. Number two, they like me. Number three, I care about them. Number four, I like them. Autonomy. Number one, they support me in making my own decisions. Number two, they do not interfere with choices I make that feel right to me. Number three, they treat me like an adult. Number four, they do not sabotage the environment where I choose to live or work. Growth. Number one, they support my pursuits for knowledge. Number two, they do not interfere with my ability to achieve my goals. Number three, they support my personal and or professional growth depending on the context. Number four, they do not sabotage the environment in which I believe I can grow. Stimulation. Stimulation. Number one, they support my pursuit of interesting and engaging activities. Number two, they do not interfere with activities I find interesting and stimulating. Mm. Number three, they support my pursuit of fun activities. Mm. They do not impede my ability to have fun. All right. Might have to get the calculator out. Check for any scores below 4, as those may indicate a basic psychological need that is being affected in this situation. Scores of 4 or 5 indicate that this individual is not likely affecting that particular need. If a need is being negatively affected in a situation, write down a few ideas as to how you might have that need met. In other words, what would you need from the individual, yourself, or the situation to satisfy the core need? What would have to happen to change the number to a 4 or 5 on the scale? Man, those are some good. Boy, I got a whole bunch of ones and twos on my. Chapter 2. 10 essential communication skills for resolving conflict. Any good conflict resolution strategy begins with the strong communication. In this chapter, we'll go over some of the fundamental communication skills for conflict resolution, which the strategies in parts 2, 3, and 4 will incorporate and expand on. It's all about communication. Remember that conflict resolution is all about establishing or rebuilding trust between people. To maintain peaceful relationships, we must have some trust in how other people will interact with us. The primary mechanism through which we get to know, understand, and predict one another's intentions and behavior is, of course, communication, including the way we speak, write, gesture, modulate tone, and use facial expressions. Recall our basic tendency to create productive or predictive models of physical and social environments. By necessity, these models include people too. The more we interact with individuals, the more accurate our models are likely to become. The less we interact with individuals, the more our minds fill in the gaps with whatever minimal information we have about that person, including what they wear, how they look, and what groups we assume they belong to, all of which unconsciously register presumed values and beliefs about the person. To avoid this, we need to really get to know people. That is, we must communicate with individuals as often and as authentically as possible while doing our best to suspend our assumptions. We begin to trust an individual when we feel they recognize and respect our values, beliefs, and needs. When the opposites occur, conflict is sure to follow, inevitably ending the avoidance or defense, inevitably ending in avoidance or defense. The key to conflict resolution then is learning to communicate in ways that clearly indicate respect, honor diversity and uniqueness, identify shared goals and values, and dispel misconceptions, misinterpretations, and perceived threats. Once real trust is built, or is at least being worked on, the individuals involved have a chance at sustainable peace. In the pages that follow, I'll highlight 10 essential communication skills that help establish trust. You'll find these skills useful once you dive into the strategies in parts 2, 3, and 4. Reflective listening. Reflective listening is a two-part skill that involves both active listening and reflective acknowledgement of what the other person is communicating. It helps resolve conflicts by allowing the other person to feel heard and understood, and by ensuring that all really that you, excuse me, really do understand them. To actively listen, remain quiet, and focus intently on what the other person is saying. To actively listen, to actively listen, remain quiet, and focus intently on what the other person is saying. See if you can gauge their underlying feelings, interests, and needs. Then, to reflect, summarize out loud the key elements you heard, focusing on their underlying feelings, interests, and needs. Here's an example. The speaker: I really hate when you talk over me. You're so rude. It's like you don't even see me. The listener: I understand. You feel frustrated and angry when I interrupt you because it feels like I'm not really hearing you. Pro tip: this skill is essential in most conflicts, but it can be especially important when the other individual is angry and needs to feel heard. Paraphrasing: similar to reflecting, paraphrasing is a way of summarizing what you heard. However, instead of focusing on the underlying emotional content, paraphrasing focuses more on the verbal content itself. In some cases, this may more effectively assure the other person that they're being heard, and in many cases, it can be combined with reflective listening. Here's an example. Speaker: I can't get any work done on time. If Pat doesn't get his outline to me by the deadline, then the client gets pissed. We get reamed, and everyone's unhappy. The listener: got it. So Pat's not getting his work to you on time, which delays your work and ultimately makes the company look bad. Pro tip: this skill becomes critical when someone delivers a long diatribe about a problem, but only a few key points need to be addressed to solve the issue. Now, I've heard this word before, but I don't really know what it means, so let's look it up. Diatribe. I don't know what it means. Diatribe. 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 This skill becomes critical when someone delivers a long diatribe, a long speech, maybe, long winded talk. Diatribe right there. I just saw it. Diatribe. All right. A fulminating piece of invective. A fulminating piece of invective. What is invective? Because I don't understand that. A fulminating piece of invective. 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 A fulminating piece of invective. Let's see what invective is. Oh shit. Then I gotta wash my brain. I almost wasted everything. Invective. 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 Invaluable. Invective. Yeah, two definitions. Invective one. Invective of or relating to or categorized by insult or abuse. Fulminating piece of characterized by insult or abuse. Invective, insulting or abusive language. Fulminating piece of abusive language. This skill becomes critical when someone delivers a long, fulminating piece of abusive language or a long diatribe about a problem. But only a few key points need to be addressed to solve the issue. Fulminating piece of, almost the same thing, abusive language. Passive listening. Sometimes people just want to feel heard. They don't want an explanation or excuse. They just need you to listen. For instance, if the individual is in a higher defensive or emotional state and anything you say could be taken the wrong way, it might be better just to listen with very few subtle indications of attention. In the future, their defenses will likely be lowered and the conversation can be less one sided. Subtle indicators of attention may include nodding your head, changing your facial expressions to indicate empathy, or making small vocal gestures. When the individual is done speaking and does not prompt you to respond, you might just say something along the lines of, "Thank you, understood." Pro tip: if you sense you are walking on eggshells with someone, the best option is to let them speak. Not much you can say in that moment will help the situation anyway. Using I statements. Using I statements. I statements, also called I messages, are ways of communicating how one feels or what one believes without making an accusation or judgment about someone else. In other words, you frame messages in terms of you or your feelings, not them and theirs. I statements are important in conflict resolution because they allow the other person to understand what you are feeling and thinking without feeling like they are necessarily to blame. But by contrast, if you tell someone that what you're experiencing is their fault, it will immediately put them on the defensive. For example, instead of saying, "You make me feel guilty," you would say, "I feel guilty when you say that because I interpret it to mean that I caused the problem." For example, instead of saying, "You make me feel guilty," you would say, "I feel guilty when you say that because I interpreted to mean that I caused the problem." Pro tip: this skill is essential when you are confronting someone about the problem you are experiencing with. Try writing out your I statement ahead of time so you are prepared to communicate the message effectively and without accusations or judgments. Exhibiting empathy. Whew. Exhibiting empathy. One of our most widespread research and applied tools in conflict resolution is the use of empathy. Although empathy has often been considered an innate capacity, with some individuals being more naturally empathetic than others, empathy researchers like Jamil Zaki at Stanford University have shown that empathy is a skill most people can hone. Empathy has been defined in various ways and consists of several subcomponents. To frame empathetic skills for purposes of conflict resolution, I would break empathy into three components: internal, verbal, and physical. Internal empathy is the actual feeling we get when we connect with, relate to, or understand someone's emotions. Verbal empathy is a reflective expression of understanding so that the other person knows we recognize and understand their emotions. Physical empathy is a bodily reflection, which may consist of altering one's position, facial expression, or movement to communicate that we sense the other's feelings. What someone believes about an event or behavior may or may not be true. However, what someone feels about it always is real. This is the important thing about empathy. We are attempting to relate to someone by how they feel, not by the belief they hold, which we may not relate to, understand, or even agree with. Pro tip: empathy is especially useful and often easier to implement when someone is presenting a problem that does not directly involve you. Adjusting body language. Albert Mehrabian's experiments in the late 1960s decoded inconsistent messages in communication. For example, if someone says, "No, I'm not mad," but their tone and body language express the opposite, the receiver will trust the predominant communication. According to Mirabian's rule, communication is 93% body language and tone, 55% and 38%, respectively, and only 7% content. That is, what you are actually saying. To more easily prevent or resolve conflict during difficult conversations, it is important to maintain proper body language so as to not communicate aggression or indifference. Try your best to maintain a neutral facial expression unless you are deliberately using physical empathy or mirroring. See page 21. You want to appear calm and confident, even if you don't feel it internally. I guess have your poker face on. Also, watch your hands and gestures. Clenched fists can be taken as signs of distress, defensiveness, or accusation. Pointing at someone can be perceived as accusatory or aggressive. Arms crossed can feel closed off, while hands in the pockets or behind the back can indicate you're hiding something or not fully present. Instead, keep your hands open, relaxed, and where they can be seen. Often people are unsure of what to do with their hands while listening. Even if it feels awkward, just let them fall to your sides and very subtly turn them outward towards the other person. When I speak, we may even raise them slightly, palms facing up. These subtle gestures subconsciously indicate that you are open, present, and looking for a resolution. Well, I see you, little June bug. I'm gonna get you, my boy. Pro tip: as you'll discover in the next skill, sitting is conducive to keeping your hands open and in front of you. as opposed to in your pockets, behind your back, or in clenched fists. Positioning. If body language is akin to the physical message we send, we might consider positioning how we stand or sit relative to the person with whom we're communicating. Let me look open. We do not want to position ourselves in a way that communicates aggression or indifference. As such, we would not turn our backs to someone, as that would indicate we are ignoring them. Nor would I suggest facing the individual head on, chest to chest, or as this stance can indicate aggression or defense. Sitting with someone is better than standing because it eases everyone into a more relaxed state, whereas standing can create or maintain tension. Invite the person to take a seat, if applicable. Make sure you are sitting at equal levels and with nothing between you. If the individual prefers to stand or sitting is not an option, stand with them but maintain a non-threatening stance, slightly off center, with the person rather than chest to chest, almost like you would if you were on a stage facing an audience together. Facing the same direction can subconsciously inspire feelings of collaboration. Pro tip: if you are helping others resolve a conflict or facilitating a difficult conversation, set up a triangle or circle of chairs. The more circular and less rectangular the shape is, the better. Circles, circles make for more inclusive, fluid conversations. Modulating vocal tone. Employing the right tone during difficult and sensitive conversations is imperative, yet it can prove quite delicate. If we are too loud or intense, we will come across as aggressive, which is likely to trigger the other person's defenses. If we are too quiet or robotic, we are likely to indicate indifference or inattention, which can incite intensity or disinterest. The correct tone for preventing or resolving conflicts is nuanced and depends on each situation. However, I tend to think of the correct tone in terms of the three C's: calm, compassionate, and confident. Remain calm to create a grounded space for the conversation to take place. Keep your voice somewhat low, but not so low that it feels passive. You want to exude confidence in your voice, not arrogance. With calm confidence, there is room for compassion. For example, when having a conversation with someone who is upset, think of yourself as a caretaker. If you entered the room to find a loved one in pain, would you grow defensive if, in their distressed state, they lashed out at you? Or would you try to understand? Think of the tone you would use to manage this pained individual. You would need to communicate in a way that is calm, strong, and open hearted. At the same time, with a person in conflict, there are a state of emotion, there they are in a state of emotional pain. If you internalize or take offense to their behavior in that space or react in a harsh or avoidant tone, you are ignoring the fact that they are in pain and simply seeking care and attention. Pro tip: cadence or tempo of speech is also important. Focusing on full enunciation of words often helps slow us down to reasonable tempos and speech without making us sound condescending or patronizing. Period. Junebug. That's definitely what I'm trying to do as I read. Work on my enunciation of words and my tone and tempo. Mirroring. During tough conversations, we want to establish the feeling that we are on the same team with someone rather than on opposing sides. In tandem with other skills in this chapter, mirroring is a technique you can use to accomplish this. Essentially, mirroring is exactly what it sounds like. You do your best to reflect the other's nonverbal communication, including their tone, body language, vocal pace, tempo, volume, and speech patterns. You might even adapt some of their vocabulary. Meeting others where they are is a generally important concept in communication theory. And mirroring others in conversations lets them know we are with them, taking in what they are expressing and going with the flow rather than attempting to control it. Pro tip: mirror subtly. You don't want to mimic someone because it may come off as condescending or strange. Asking questions. Asking questions. When confronted with conflict, you may need to ask questions to clarify certain points or understand what the individual feels or needs. Asking open ended questions is important for allowing the other person to arrive to their own conclusions. For example, asking, "How do you feel about that?" or more is more open and exploratory than asking, "Do you feel sad?" Because the latter is a yes or no question that presumes the emotion involved. Asking the right types of questions, however, may be less important than the spirit in which the questions are asked. During difficult conversations, inquiries should be made in the spirit of exploration and curiosity. Ask in order to learn, not to coerce, convince, or manipulate. When the other person answers, listen with the intent to understand, not to formulate your next response or question. Pro tip: when someone else brings the issue to you, you may or may not need to ask clarifying questions. When you are the one with the issue, however, you should always invite the other person to participate in the conversation by asking questions. Do your best not to turn your issue into an accusation. How to use these skills going forward. Each interaction or relationship may call for particular combinations of these skills. However, rest assured that they all will come in handy at some point. The better you get at using them, either separately or in combination, the stronger your relationship will likely become. You may find you already use some of these skills naturally, but with deliberate practice, you can choose when and how to use them more effectively. To improve, start slowly and focus on each skill separately. Spend a day just practicing reflective listening, for instance. Then spend a day only focusing on empathy. Once you've gone through all of these skills separately, start combining them. Over time, you'll become better at determining which skills are most useful in particular interactions. They may become second nature eventually. In the following chapters, see if you can identify the skills that would be most effective for each situation. And that is the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Conflict Resolution Playbook by Jeremy Pollack. Chapter 1 being Conflict Resolution 101, and chapter 2, 10 essential communication skills for resolving conflict. 10 essential communication skills for resolving conflict. I think personally, my reading would be on a 3 tonight if I had to judge it. Maybe a 2. No, a 3. I give myself a 3. It wasn't bad. I stumbled over quite a few words, though. But Got to keep pushing. Got to keep pushing. So far, I definitely think it's some good things. That was definitely some stuff, at least about the empathy for sure. I definitely remember hearing or reading in the other book about the art of conversation back there. So definitely some things, that I think can be used. Definitely some things that I believe this book will definitely give me to learn and grow from. So hopefully it was something that you, the listeners, can maybe grasp onto and apply to your lives, or your work life, your home life, your relationship with your children, husband, wife, whatever, mother, father, sister, brother, so on and so forth. One day at a time. One day at a time. Whatever you're trying to do, you're going to have to take it one day at a time and practice at least a little bit every day. At least a little bit every day. And see how you can, grow. But I definitely think this one is going to be a decent book. Definitely have to take notes. Definitely something that, would need to be taking notes on. But besides all that, we'll keep pushing that. Conflict Resolution Playbook by Jeremy Pollack. We'll come back next time with part 2. Strategies to prevent conflicts. Chapter 3. Establishing the right conditions for difficult conversations. And chapter 4. Letting go of resentment. I think that's definitely something I need to work on. But yeah, anyway. So far, so good. So far, so good. But man, we're gonna go ahead and stop there. Thank you everybody who stopped by and listened in. No matter how long it's been for. Hey, if you do stop by and late, catch it late, like, comment. Let me know if there's anything you may have heard that you think could be useful for you in your life. What things do you use naturally, as it asks? What skills do you possess naturally? Or is conflict resolution something you need to work at? Do you need it in your tool bag? Because I need it in mine. But that was this session of Reading with Shilo. Till next time, man. Shalom. Shilo out. I hope y'all have a nice night. Day, evening, whenever you see it, whenever you watch it.